Welcome to our second session of Foresight's Existential Hope Worldbuilding Course. The first one was really mostly focused on setting the stage on possible existential hope futures and some introductions to world building. Today, we're really excited to be focusing in more on laying the technical foundations of some of the worlds that you'll be creating. And so the purpose of today is really to get our technological realities straight. It's not that all the worlds will be totally technologically determined, but technologies are a pretty big factor, I think, that will be shaping our world. And so that's the focus of this week's session before we get into, a few of the world building and a few of the mushier bits of society, economics, values, and so forth in the next session. And I couldn't be happier than to have Jason Crawford here with us today. He has from a really wonderful org and has started out, I think, really as a tech entrepreneur, then started writing up his thoughts on the general history of progress, especially technological progress, but like progress across the board, really. There's a lot of economic terms in there too. And, since then has really also launched together with Heike, the Progress Fellows, which is really like a wonderful fellowship all focused on basically like helping people write and communicate about progress better. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jason. You've definitely, I think, really shaped the philosophy of many foresighters a lot over the past few years. And if you want to perhaps kick us off by saying a few words on, some musings on the history or philosophy of progress. Jason, if you want to say hi, now is a great time.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. Great to see all of you. I'm glad I can be here and speak to you. Yeah, I'll dive right in. Beatrice gave me a prompt along the lines of what do you think are the most important pillars to consider to achieve successful and efficient technological progress in the future? And that was an interesting prompt. I'd never thought about that exact question before. And I thought what might be interesting to chat about a little bit up front, just to kick this all off, would be what are some things that I think people get wrong when they think about the future regarding technology and the economy? And what are some, and related, maybe what are some trends that aren't well known or are underappreciated that we should think about? And so the number one thing that jumped to mind for me was energy usage. And by the way, so I'm going to say a bunch of things. It's possible that all of you already know everything I'm going to say because we're in this small circle of forward-thinking, progress-focused, technology-focused people. But, certainly if you went and asked the average person on the street about energy usage, trends in energy usage, what the future of it might look like, what's an optimistic future, most people have bought this kind of degrowth narrative that energy usage is somehow inherently bad, that energy is toxic and poisonous and it's killing the planet, and therefore the less of it we use, the better. And so they're hoping that, we don't use more energy or we find ways to be just more efficient and do more with less and that kind of thing. I think this is a mistake. Energy is life. There are, yes, always ways to be more efficient with it, but I think a flourishing future is one where we use more and more energy. And we do that by making it clean energy and making it very cheap and finding cheap, abundant, reliable, clean sources of energy. And so I think, if you look at energy usage per capita in the US, it has flatlined since 1970. So some people see that as a victory. I see it as a tragedy. I think a flourishing future is one where we get back on the curve of exponentially increasing. You may have heard this referred to as the Henry Adams curve, term coined by J. Storrs Hall, previous Foresight president, in his book, Where is My Flying Car? And you can find that chart in my book review on Roots of Progress. Anyway, so I think a flourishing future is one where we get back on that curve and start increasing per capita energy usage. You can broaden this, by the way, to not just energy, but all resources. There's a popular narrative about, quote, decoupling, where we are getting more efficient and therefore we're able to use more, we're able to drive more economic growth without driving as much, resource usage. And that is true. That is actually happening. But I don't think it's a pointer to the future. I don't think that means that the future is that we just never use any more resources and somehow we manage to just create more and more growth. I think more growth actually means using more resources and actually using resources in ways that might seem to us to be like shockingly wasteful, the same way that the way that we use water or energy or whatever, or metals would seem to be shockingly wasteful to people from a few hundred years ago. It's not because we're somehow profligate with materials, it's because materials and resources are so cheap now and so abundant that we can use them in all sorts of ways. Oh, related to all this, by the way, is the Jevons paradox with relationship to energy, which is that as you become more energy efficient in your usage of energy and application of energy, the total amount of energy usage increases rather than decreases. And there's a simple economic explanation for this, which is that when you make things more efficient, you make you make their outputs cheaper. And when you make outputs cheaper, that means the supply curve shifts to the left. I always forget which way is left or right. Anyway, the supply curve shifts and you end up with a higher quantity demanded at a lower price. Anyway, so a flourishing future, I think, is one of abundant resources, both material and energy, and one where per capita usage of everything is higher rather than lower. Related to this, I think a flourishing future is one where we have more people rather than fewer. And related to the resource usage kind of thing, some people, especially in a degrowth kind of future, think about slowing and stopping or even reducing population. Talk to Paul Ehrlich or Jane Goodall, and they'll tell you, the ideal number of people on Earth is, 1 billion, give or take a factor of 2, and, compared to the 8 billion that we have today. And I think actually a flourishing future is one where we have lots more people. And related to that, by the way, fertility rates worldwide are slowing down and decelerating and actually are below replacement in most of the world, except for in Africa. UN population projections are that the world population will actually plateau around 10, 11 billion people, and maybe even decrease after that. If you want to think about how do we continue to get more and more people, you might want to think about what are the drivers of decreased fertility. It seems that in generally, increasing wealth and education, especially of women, right, leads to fewer children as they just decide they don't want the burden or maybe want to go pursue careers instead. What could be a future where we return to above replacement, fertility rates? Hopefully we do that in a way that we're not just like roping women back into the role of housewives again, like we did, 50, 100 years ago. Hopefully it's a future where everybody continues to have choice and freedom and gets to live a great life and have an awesome career and, that kind of thing. But somehow we can also have kids. And I have lots of thoughts about that, but it could be longevity, technology to extend fertility, the period of fertility for one, right? But also to just expand lifespan. The longer you can wait to have kids and still have them, maybe the more you'll have. I know some people wanted to have more, but then they got too old. The more room you have in a single life to have a great career and have kids, the more you might be willing to do both if you can do both. Maybe if we were all just super rich, we'd have more, we could afford to the things that make having kids easier. Maybe if we had robotic nannies to take care of the kids or something, maybe if we just had some regulatory reform. There's a great economics paper called Car Seats as Contraception or something like this about how car seat requirements, made it's really difficult to fit more than 2 car seats in a car. So you want to have a bunch of kids young, it really sucks. Anyway, so that's a thing to look into. And then, on a similar note as all this, the last thing I thought about and came up with for Beatrice was just like pro-growth solutions to environmental challenges. So everything I've been saying so far is against degrowth futures and for more growth type futures. And, I think that for climate change, for instance, you should know that there's a plan to solve climate change without degrowth, without even decelerating energy usage, economic growth, population growth, all of that stuff. And I provided a link, and hopefully that got into your, reading notes and stuff. Excuse me. And I think the same is true for basically all other, environmental problems. Okay, so those are some thoughts to kick us off. I see there's already a question in the chat. Do you think an AI, intelligence, and associated tech can take the place of human population growth? Possibly can take the place in terms of doing knowledge work, right? That remains to be seen, but sure feels like it's on track for that, right? The ultimate question is, can AI actually take over R&D and drive forward science and technology? If so, then that actually alleviates one of the biggest concerns, which is, are we going to have enough people to continue driving progress forward? If you dig into the economic literature, as we push out the frontier of progress, we tend to need more and more people working on the frontier for a variety of reasons. The frontier becomes more specialized. The problems become harder as we pick off low-hanging fruit. It takes longer to get to the frontier, so you just need to do more education to even get up to speed, et cetera. And so we need, basically, the bottom line is exponential growth requires exponentially growing inputs to the growth process, to the R&D process. So as our economy grows and everything grows, we need more and more researchers, we need more and more R&D dollars, et cetera. And if the population levels off, then at a certain point, we can't keep growing the population of researchers. You can't have an exponentially growing population of researchers without, in the long term, have an exponentially growing population of people. Unless you suddenly have AI researchers, right? Or we can create AI researchers. And so that could be a way that we, could solve the growth problem without solving the fertility crisis. Although I hope we solve the fertility crisis itself. Could AI take the place of human population growth? Certainly not in other terms, right? Just if you just think humans are good and we should have more of them around because they're great. AI doesn't necessarily take the place of that. I don't know. Maybe we'll fall in love with AI too. It'll be just like having other people around. Who knows? Hard to foresee, the singularity by definition is like that point, you can't see past it. So I feel like we're kind of going around a bend. Civilization is, right? It's very hard to see around the corner right now and to see what's coming even, very near term.
Yeah, great. Aaron, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I actually have two, but okay, let's stay on this topic then first. Thanks for being here. Yeah, I'm observing how humanoid robots are making a lot of progress, and we could get them to costing less than a car, around say $10,000. And we might at some point basically have billions of them. And maybe they have a ChatGPT kind of like voice interface. I can tell them like, hey, please, robot, do my, dishes or cook a meal for me, whatever it might be, right? And we'll start out in factories. But I guess like the smartest scientists could then have, hundreds of these robots and direct them to do research for them. Do you think this is a viable way to still have, say, enough labor at the frontier for progress?
Yeah, maybe. Who knows if the human scientists are even the ones who will continue to direct the labor, right? I don't know. Yeah, it's quite possible. And I like the vision of, another long-term economic trend is just an increasing ratio of capital to labor in the economy. As we have more and more machines to do stuff and the machines themselves get more and more sophisticated and productive, the machine to human ratio keeps increasing. And I guess you all are only extrapolating out like 2 decades or something. But, if you go like way far in the future, I don't know, I'd love to write a sci-fi story someday where humanity, makes contact with some alien species that comes and visits us, and they're driving like a planet-size, spaceship or something. And then we find out there's 3 aliens like running the whole thing. And all the rest of it is just machines and robots and AI and all that kind of thing. And they're like, no, we're just like a little team of, because you can imagine some distant future where everybody gets a planet, like one planet per person is like the allocation of real estate. Now, probably not 20 years in the future. Okay. Side note on that though, another broad pattern of progress is that progress tends to accelerate. And the long-term metrics of progress tend to be not exponential, but super exponential. They grow faster than any exponential curve. It's like exponential, but then every once in a while, the exponent increases because of some fundamental increase in capacities. And, so part of what this means is in general, any time increment, probably more progress will be made in that time increment than in the previous similar, even on a percentage basis, right? And especially with AI really just starting to take off, we may be at some inflection point where the next 20 years might see a century's worth of progress, or who knows what exactly is the ratio.
Awesome. Let's see if we have a question from someone else. If not, then Aaron, you can ask the second one, and maybe we may only have time for one more. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to, or drop something in the chat if you can't. Yeah, unmute.
Yeah,
Kevin,
someone else is coming.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Right.
Yeah. Hi, Jason. I had a question about how you define progress. So it seems like progress studies is defined as progress in terms of technological growth and economic growth. And I was wondering why such a narrow definition? Because I feel a society should aim for maybe development of human capabilities, the development of, let's say, authentic individual futures instead of just technological growth. Technological growth can be like a means towards this end, but it's not necessarily this end lead to like authentic individual development. And it doesn't really need to, let's say, I would say like the most memorable moments of my life was like being encountering like some movies, some works of art. How does technology lead to the development of cultural forms, let's say, that change people's lives?
Yeah. Movies are a technology, right? If you encountered a movie that spoke to your soul, the movie needed to be invented first. The moving camera and the projection screen and all of that need to be invented first for that to exist. So they go together. I do not define progress solely or in terms of technology or economy or GDP or anything like that. There are many different types of progress. If you're unclear on what type of progress you're talking about, you can just ask what type. Progress in what? There's scientific progress, there's technological progress, there's economic progress, there's social progress, there's moral progress, there's progress in government, there's progress in lots of different things. And ultimately, there's progress in human well-being, in human capabilities, in, length and health of human life, in human happiness, in human connection, in, many different things that we might think of as more closely related. So I think, my ultimate sort of standard, what is progress for? Why do we care? What do we even judge as good? Or what is true progress? My standard for that is human well-being. And so I think of human progress as the ultimate. But I do see that on a large historical scale, all forms of progress go together. They all are interdependent, intertwined, and ultimately inseparable. They do not move in lockstep, and some areas can get ahead of others, certainly. In the 20th century, I think very unfortunately, we saw technology and industry get well ahead of morality and governance, and it led to the world wars. But I do think that on the largest scale and the longest term, all these forms of progress do go together. And that's why I think ultimately it's a good thing, because all of these things do, I think, ultimately lead to human well-being. And that's also, I think, why we can occasionally just say progress as a simple term and, without always specifying exactly what type we're referring to.
Awesome. Do you have time for one quick more, or do you have to go?
Sure.
So fine.
No, I don't have a hard stop, so happy to keep chatting.
Eric, then you have the last question.
Okay. So I see in the chat, how do you figure in the humans attempting to slow the rate of technological progress, intentionally or not? Will that impact the more pure theory that we could experience? Yes, it might. So I think that, a couple of things. First off, even though I think the very long-term patterns of progress do show this kind of, this accelerating pattern, it almost feels sometimes like an unstoppable, juggernaut. I do not think that progress is automatic or inevitable. I think it's contingent. It depends on choice and effort. Ultimately, it's up to us. We have to choose to continue driving it forward. And ultimately, we have to believe that progress is both possible and desirable in order to do that. And that's why I talk about these things. I do think that, this sort of notion of, you have this super exponential curve. That's true when you zoom way out. When you zoom in, the curve is really wiggly and bumpy, like any other complex social or even biological phenomenon. It doesn't it doesn't obey really strict, simple laws the way physics and chemistry do. There's too much complexity in there. And, history overall is one of progress, but there are episodes in certain times and places of slowdown, of stagnation, of regress, even of collapse. And I think all of those things are possible to us. Although I would be surprised if we collapsed and regressed too far. But I think we could have something of, that could accurately be described in those terms. No, progress is not guaranteed, and who knows what the next 20 years will bring exactly. I think 50 years ago, if we'd been talking about this, we would have said that by 2020, we'd have nuclear powered everything, and we'd have, moon bases and flying cars and lots of cool stuff like that, and supersonic passenger travel. And none of that stuff exactly came true the way we were envisioning it. Yes, these things can always be subject to random shocks and cultural inputs that you didn't expect, and so forth.
Well, one reason more to build some positive worlds and keep on pushing. Thank you so much, Jason. It was a true delight to have you here. I shared a little bit more info about you here in the chat as well. But if you maybe just want to leave people with, is there any relevant info for, let's say, builders about any upcoming publications of Roots of Progress or any upcoming, fellowship deadlines or anything else that people should know about here as we close this out?
We don't have any deadlines yet, but we will be announcing, probably in the next, in the coming months, we'll be announcing the next cohort of the Roots of Progress Fellowship, which is for progress writers. Keep an eye out for that. The best way to do that is to probably subscribe to the Roots of Progress Substack, which you can find on, the link to that from rootsofprogress.org, and or follow me on Twitter. I'm Jason Crawford on Twitter, and I spend too much time there. I'm also on Threads and Warpcast and other fun social networks like that. Actually, yeah, Alison, I don't know if Foresight is on Warpcast yet, but you should totally be there given the crypto interests.
Okay, we'll join and let's want to bump into each other. Okay, I shared the Substack here at least, and then the Twitter, I think it's pretty easy to find you there. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. That was a lot of content in a very short time. Very much appreciated, and I hope to see you in person very soon.
Thanks, everybody. Best of luck, and I look forward to seeing what you all come up with through this program.
Yeah, no pressure on you guys. Okay, bye.